bumper music going. Everybody, as you start joining the webinar, this is Steve Hartman from GatherUp. Just wanted to give you a heads up. We'll give people about a minute here to get signed in, logged in, get comfortable before we start. So just give us about another 45 seconds or so. All right. I see some familiar names here. Gatlin, welcome to the GatherUp webinar. The Q&A and chat is open. So if you would like to ask any questions as we go through the content, feel free to post in there. I'll be checking it periodically as we go throughout. If there are questions related to the recording, we will be sending that out as well. The recording and the slides we'll share out after the webinar is done, so watch your email for that in the coming days. We usually get it out the next day, but no guarantees. So tomorrow or Thursday, we'll have that to you. We're really excited for this month's webinar. So this is an agency-specific webinar. We're talking about scaling your reputation management, and we're going to provide some tips on effective growth and nurture and retention programs. One of the things we often hear, and we'll cite some sources on this, is just the difficulty, or one of the main challenges for many of you, is that getting those new customers and then providing them expectations. And so we'll talk a lot about that as we go along. One call out too, before we get started, we do have another webinar planned for mid-June. We're looking at June 18th. Content and guests to be determined. We have some ideas, but just watch your email or go to gatherup.com/webinars for updates to that. All right. Without further ado, let's jump in. For those who are new, GatherUp is the platform that helps businesses scale their reputation management, listening, understanding, and engaging with customers so that they and businesses can improve the overall customer experience. So hopefully you're not new. I would think you're pretty familiar with us, but that's who we are. The agenda for today, we're going to talk about a foundation, setting a foundation, building internal processes in place so that you can grow. We'll talk about some of those acquisition strategies. One of the most important things, and I hope one of the things that many of you will take out of this, is the activation and onboarding best practices, because that is such a vital component to retaining customers. And then, of course, those retention strategies and how to keep engaged with your clients, your customers, your clinics. So we have a special guest, two special guests this month. Brian Urban is here. He is the founder of CounselEAR, and he's a former owner of Advanced Hearing and Balance Center. Brian, thanks for being here, and just tell us and the audience a little bit more about CounselEAR and what you've built there.
Yeah, basically, CounselEAR is an online office management system for hearing healthcare practices. We do support speech pathology and some other disciplines as well. But really the focus is to, take the whole clinic workflow, make that easily available online. And, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is, connecting the dots with patients, with clients, and just having really easy touch points where we're keeping communication with patients to keep them in the fold, because it's very hard when you're running a business to continually stay on top of all these different initiatives and are we reaching out at the right times. And so one of our big areas of focus in CounselEAR is just automating a lot of those systems, as well as a lot of the technical things regarding like coding reimbursement and insurance claims and all those kinds of fun things too, which we won't talk about today. But we certainly want to make sure that those touch points with patients are automatic.
Awesome. So happy to have you here. Thanks for joining. Also here is Matt Saeger. He is the VP of Customer Experience at GatherUp. Matt, you want to tell us about your role and some of the experience that you've had helping businesses grow throughout your career?
Yeah, so Matt Saeger, I've been in the industry and working with really technology for everything post sales. So this is the support, implementation, long-term success of customers across many different industries. I've done it for hospitality and hotels, but now, of course, with GatherUp and marketing across a lot of different verticals. And one of the things that I've seen as we go through and kind of leaning on what Brian's already talked about, the automation and how do we scale this, and how do we design a customer journey that allows both success for your customer, but you, right? You want to have your hand in everything all at once. How do we build things for success, and how do we build it with some automation that makes it easier for us to do over and over and over?
Yeah, excellent. And I love it that we have a wide breadth of industry here. We have everything from audiology, Brian's expertise, and then we got hotels, we got SaaS, everything in between. So um, let's jump into it. The first topic we're going to talk about is the solid foundation for growth. And a big part of this is, like I said, we did a survey last year, we being GatherUp, where we surveyed agencies and resellers along with some small businesses. And one of the questions was around which is your biggest challenge? And far and away, it's about getting new customers. And that is consistent across both agencies, resellers, small businesses, multi-locations. Everybody cares about that, right? And so as we think about that, Brian, what challenges do you see at CounselEAR when it comes to getting new clinics on board, and how is it? How are you setting those expectations with them, and why do you think that is also a challenge? Because that also comes up. So getting new customers and then
Hmm.
managing their expectations.
Yeah, I mean, we've been very fortunate as far as like getting new, clinics to use Counselor. A lot of it is through word of mouth. We've been very fortunate, kind of did a lot of the legwork over the last, decade and a half to try to get our name out there and build our reputation. So fortunately, people tend to come to us having already heard some things about us, but then that's just the start, right? So it's about nurturing that and some simple things like we give clinics the ability to use a sandbox. We have a fully built out test environment that they can work in. We give them access to live support while they're testing things. And then during the onboarding phase, it's a lot of hand holding, right? Because I actually went through that process myself in my private practice. And I'm sure most people on this call, have experienced this. Like in a clinic specifically, your patient data is like, I mean, obviously people are incredibly valuable. The patient data is incredibly valuable, and so that has to be taken very carefully taken care of. So we walk with people through that process because that's oftentimes one of the biggest fears is if I go through this transition, I could lose data, things won't function well on the other side of this. And so it's a lot of really just a lot of transparency, talking through things, making sure we're not too aggressive in the timelines. Some people call up and say, I want to switch to your system tomorrow. And we say, nope, we're gonna pace this out a little bit, right? There's just some things we need to talk with you about and work through. So it's a lot of just like trying to be very transparent about the process.
Right, right. So, getting new clients, getting new clinics in your case, new customers is a challenge. And another question we asked last year was around what activities do you have an agency manage, or somebody outside the small business, right? And the two things that came up at the top were SEO and web design. And that's very common for agencies, especially who work with GatherUp. They're often involved in SEO, local SEO, web design, things like that. But I think one thing we see is that those tend to be longer cycles to get to value, right? Like a web design, a new website can take months. SEO is a long-term play, extremely valuable, but hard to show that instant value. And I think that's where we tend to lean. This conversation is to start with reviews and reputation because there are some quick wins that can happen initially. So we think of it almost as a foot in the door, in terms of your overall offering. Brian, I know you guys offer marketing automation, and you mentioned a lot of other things, with your office management solution. But when it comes to new customers, where does review management land on your kind of, I don't know, order of operations? Like when do you bring it up? Is it that foot in the
Mm-hmm.
door?
Yeah, and I apologize. So I kind of think this from two standpoints. One is how does CounselEAR, attract new clinics to our system, and kind of more directly, probably to your question there is how do we help the clinics that we support how do we help them get new patients, right? And so that's probably more of the thrust of this. And so when we're talking with clinics during the onboarding process, every single time we bring up the ability to automate patient review requests. And that's because, speaking once again on behalf of myself as an audiologist and former private practice owner, we don't typically do not come from really much in the way of business training. So there's a lot of good ideas, a lot of initiatives, but when we can go to these clinics we're starting to work with and say, we can automate this process. Maybe you've received only a few reviews over the years or maybe none. We can really help you ramp that up quickly. So that's sort of the biggest thing for us, is just keeping it really simple.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you have no reviews or some reviews, we can greatly enhance that very quickly and set to be automated, right? So in a lot of cases, we don't even get in the weeds beyond that. It's just keeping it really, really straightforward.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's.
yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say, similar for you. I know like GatherUp has really expanded our feature set. But I think, one thing you've talked about in the past is this as well, is just where do we start?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, especially if you look at the two last graphs. I don't think it's a coincidence that the top two challenges are getting new customers and then kind of maintaining the client expectations. Is if you don't do that well, you're constantly going to have to be going to look for new customers. And so, some of the stats that I've seen in the industry, it usually costs 7 to 9 times more to get a new customer than it does to retain an old one. And so if you're constantly having to go get new ones, you're spending more and more money, and that's money you're not spending retaining. And so as you look through, especially where we're helping small businesses, that list isn't usually specialized by just one thing. In my conversations with a lot of even you on the call today, I appreciate it. It's just that there's so many offerings. And when you're coming to somebody that doesn't have that experience, right, you're having to go through and explain just the basics a lot of times. And so while you're going through and talking through the advantages of SEO, the websites, which we know have a huge impact on their customers' business, there's also the idea of, I need to be able to show some initial value while we work on some of these things, right? Is to make sure that they feel like they're getting something out of paying for this, as they don't really know. And so I think that's definitely a really good point there, is the thought of, like, especially in the onboarding, how do we get you to kind of a first value, even if it wasn't necessarily that value that you wanted coming out of the gate.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when you're in the industry, you see these statistics every day, but I know, to your point, Brian, like a lot of audiologists don't live in marketing. They don't have a great marketing background. So there's lots of great information out there about the importance of reviews. Here are some examples. Just the vast amount of people that are using these to compare a business, to choose a business. A lot of them want to see what responses look like. So as we think about that as well, we'll talk about that later on, about review responses specifically. But there's a lot of benefits to reviews. And so I think that's another thing that we may have to make sure that we're communicating to the end business that we're working with. Brian, I think you touched on this a little bit, the value of automation, right? So there's a lot that goes into owning a small business and running it. You probably don't have a 15-person marketing team to do stuff like this for you. And so, when you talk to clinics, they must view this automation as just like essential, right?
I think once they get their head around how it can work for them, because it tends to be this big. And once again, we're talking with clinics that are experts in hearing and balance healthcare. They're experts in patient counseling. They're expert in diagnostics. But then you get to, like you said, marketing, and they're like, yeah. And so sometimes it's even just initially introducing that topic, right? So some of the people on this call probably are working with organizations and customers that are, much more involved with this. But we're speaking to a group. This is, in some cases, we broach this for the first time, or they heard it at a conference, or a colleague. We get a lot of people who said, my colleague in a different state, had no reviews, and now they have 100 reviews in the first 2 months. And how do we do that? Right. It's always they want that endpoint, which is great.
Right.
That's what we want to help them with. So, we, once again, it is really, really simplistic approach. A lot of times it's just, let's get to that solution. Here's the tool. And so the conversations obviously are fairly succinct.
Yeah.
And I think it's also too connecting it to the wealth of data that you get. I mean, I think the idea of review generation is one that everyone has a great concept of, but a lot of times as we come back to kind of the basics again with some of these newer customers, there's a wealth of just outside of getting that Google review, right? It's being able to capture first party review, third party review, understand themes, trends, keywords. All of those things not only help your online presence, of course, but also the amount of wealth of data that it can inform an agency or someone that's helping them try to get better at what they're doing, putting out better marketing materials, doing better promotions, optimizing your keywords. All of those things have such a great importance in data and foundation in data. And if the more you have, even if you just upload a list of 300 people and go get feedback requests, the data that you can get from feedback is so important. And it's not just something that you should do once in this. It's a constant cycle. And if you think of kind of a customer journey within software, I'm sure, Brian, it sounds like you do this as well. You have a very high touch, white glove service. You have to be constantly asking for feedback at each step: post sales, onboarding, implementation, long-term success. Feedback is vital at every one of those stages. And each one of those informs you on how you can continue to take care of your customers and give you the data that helps you bring in more and repeat.
Yeah, and it's tricky when, especially if you are the founder of your company, right? You've been there from the start. You made the initial connections. You helped those initial businesses on board with your system. So you were very tightly, involved in that whole process. And so you were getting that feedback. As your team grows, and we're very fortunate up to a team of 20 now, as the ownership, you don't or managers, you don't necessarily get that feedback directly anymore, right? So now you are relying on in some ways external systems to feed some of that to you, and hopefully in a manner in which the person who's providing the feedback feels comfortable, being honest, right? Because sometimes the feedback isn't positive, and that's okay. We want to use that, right? And so and turn that into a positive.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, Brian. The negative, like hearing the negative, it's tough to hear, especially as a business owner. That's like your pride and joy, right? You put your
Yeah.
sweat and tears into this, and to hear something bad about it, but it is important because it ultimately makes you better and makes you find improvements. So, one thing I wanted to add here, a couple things, actually from a Moz study that if you haven't seen it, we can share out in the recap, but 86% of people will write at least some reviews in their lifetime. So if you're not asking everybody or not automating this to make sure it goes out, the review request that is, you're missing out. And then in that same study, 40% of people had not received a review request in 5 years. So there's still gaps here that can be filled with some automation and with some tools in the marketplace. Last thing on this topic before we move on to like acquisition and onboarding, I wanted to talk a little bit about like internal team structures and things that you have to be done before you start to really ramp this up, because obviously if you start growing and acquiring new clients, but you don't have the support internally to provide a good experience, that's not going to go well. And so, maybe Brian, as you scaled CounselEAR, like what were some of the learnings you have? And then same to you, Matt. I know there's you have a lot of experience in growing and scaling these types of systems. So just like internal structures, buy-in from the team, things like that.
Yeah, I think probably our biggest challenge was anticipating need for new staff. We definitely ran a very intentionally a lean ship for many years, right? We wanted to be very efficient. We have our development in-house, so a lot of our resources went to development, so we were continually being able to respond. Like we do release new features every 2 weeks, right? So we have a very rapid iteration schedule, and that was really where we hung our hat at that, and of course support. But the challenge was a lot of times it felt like we were maybe a little behind the eight ball. We would realize we needed to hire after we should have already hired, and so you're maybe a few months into that process. And so that's been a big kind of learning curve for us, is just being able to better predict those changes, and also just being able to kind of, we got from the outset, like how can our support team, how can our onboarding team best communicate I don't want to say easy gets, but some of those, quick hitters that, hey, when you start up, here are different aspects of the system, one of which may be like patient reviews and SEO and things you talked about, that show some immediate value, right? So people feel like, hey, this transition yeah, it took some work, it took some time. There's some preparation around it. But boy, we came out of this pretty quickly, seeing some positives. So part of that's just getting our team, some of who have worked in audiology practice before, some that have not, but getting them comfortable with communicating those kind of immediate benefits.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that I see a lot of companies face is they sell a dream and there's lots of great things that go into it. And then customers immediately hit the reality, which is it's hard work. There is some things that you need to do. And sometimes if you're trying to fit your entire product or service into 1 2 week onboarding or 2 hour onboarding, you can't do it. And so what customers end up with is too much information. They're drinking from the fire hose.
Yeah.
And then you leave them off, and this thought of, well, we'll have somebody downstream talk to them in 60 days, by which time it's just too late. And so as you start thinking through about how you build and scale it, what I would suggest first is to map out what are those initial wins. So Brian, I think you're 100% right. What are the first couple of things? And then what do we need to do in order to support those, right? And then those are what I like, the industry or so we'll call the jobs to be done, right? And let's map out, all right, this customer will take 3 hours here and 4 hours here. If we have 30 of those, then we need, 4 or 5 people, and so that becomes a more formulaic way to scale. And this is the approach I've taken with support teams, customer success teams. As more customers come in, you need more people to take care of them potentially. But part of this also, I think, Brian, is automation. So as you look through those different jobs to be done, there's inherently a couple of those. You're like, man, that is absolutely manual. We do not need a person to go and click this button every single time. And so what can we be doing in order to replace that? What's the cost-effective way to automate that part of it, so we can spend more time helping that customer get to that initial value or get them to that first time value?
Yeah, you guys are doing a great job of just transitioning us right to these next topics. Touching on them already, which is awesome. But I think it speaks to the importance of onboarding. I think Matt, you had said this to me last week, onboarding being the bridge from sales to value or realized value, right? So your sales team is out there, closing new clients or clinics or customers, whatever the case may be. And then comes kind of like this inflection point, I guess, in some ways, the onboarding experience, because everybody knows like sales might go well. And if you have a really poor onboarding experience where things don't go well, or it's not communicated, or the timing is off, that can kind of derail things. And that's where that retention play comes in. So as we look at onboarding, I think, one thing the two of you could probably speak very well to. I think we've already touched on this a little bit, but just being a partner with these clients and making them feel that way, and providing multiple checkpoints in terms of communication with the team and things like that. And Brian, you have a really interesting approach with your kind of training activities that you do, and I think you kind of said it earlier, but do you want to expand on that? How you kind of get to that point where, yeah, we're going to green light them and they're good to go versus, hey, they're not
Mhm.
quite.
Yeah, so we have learned over time to be careful about when someone, goes live, because some instances we've seen where perhaps like the owner of the practice set the data migration date, because a lot of times we're migrating a lot of data as part of their transition, and they'll say, yeah, do it on this date, and then we'll find out a week before that the owner of the practice is going on vacation for 2 weeks during that time. And so then, we've tried that a couple times, and it usually just does not go well, because the staff is trying to figure things out, and there's no one who's really kind of available and sort of, helping us direct the process from that side. And so in those cases, we'll reach out and say, okay, I totally understand that, but we really think we should move this back. So we wouldn't necessarily like 100%, but we strongly encourage them to like be prepared. This is something where this is a big change. We want everyone on board, everyone, all hands on deck kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so we do obviously training, live virtual training before before they go live. We also recently implemented a tool, kind of built our own tool for walking through specific exercises in the system, sort of like a minimum competency kind of thing. We don't score it, we don't require they do certain things, but we found it's a really helpful tool just for staff to be able to quickly kind of go through it and get some key areas. Because like you were saying, Matt, before, a lot of this is drinking from the fire hose. It's so much information because we're getting into, I mean, the breadth of topics we get into in our trainings is incredibly wide, right? We get to the point of how are you creating an insurance claim, right? Versus how are you potentially automating reviews, or how are you tracking hearing aids regarding their warranties, and it's all business metrics tracking. It's all over the place. Online scheduling, right? We do that, and then we also recently implemented. It's not required, but once again, we really work from the expectation that the clinic's going to set this up. We have a post go live Q&A session. We always offered this. Hey, if you want to talk with us, we're happy to do it. And we've changed that into much more of so when are we going to have your post live Q&A? And it's just a great time that they're a week in, they're 2 weeks in. They tend to have much more detailed questions about how the system's functioning in their environment. So it allows us to really get targeted. Okay, this is a pain point. Let's address that right now. Let's not wait. I think, Matt, you alluded to this before. Let's not wait several weeks until they call us really frustrated, pulling their hair out. Like, that's too late. We need to get on board with this earlier when it's just a minor annoyance. And so that's probably one of the bigger things we've done, is just being more proactive post go live on just making sure that we're addressing their concerns.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great. I think one of the things that is not everybody's created the same or learns the same way, is especially in an onboarding thing. My wife's a teacher, and she would very much attest to that. The idea, though, is to think of segmentation, right? And Brian, I love the idea of kind of having that kind of short quiz or test. It's not required, but it helps you understand, like, what are the things that they're going to want to see and come into. Another best practice I've done is, especially when it comes to onboarding, is any new hire that you have in your own organization, have them go through that same onboarding, because it has to be the basics. It has to be that entry level to build up a foundation, and take that test afterwards. If they don't get it, your customers aren't going to get it either. And so that's something that's really helped me, is I come in and spend time building out these and feel like we have the best material in the entire world. But I come from a lens knowing a lot of this information. Brian, to your point again, just like they don't know this marketing material. And so if you can have somebody come in and understand those basics, a lot of times it's even simpler than what you have in your mind. It's, I'm going to jump them right to like the third rung or the fourth rung of knowledge. And it's like, nope. If we don't hit that first really, really well, there's really even no reason to talk about the third or fourth rung, because they're not going to be able to get to that level of value. They have to have a level of data. They have to have a level of competency. And so I love the idea of like a Q&A after 2 weeks, because on top of your onboarding, they've built in some of their own ties to their business. And then you can really have some very deep dive conversations about how we can then extend this. We've reached that initial value. How can we then identify the next thing to go solve and go do it? And it's almost like a rinse and repeat, right? We've identified, we talk about the goals to go solve this one thing, and we go and solve it. And yes, you may have 7 or 8 different problems you can solve, but again, trying to solve all 7 or 8 at the same exact time usually is not a great recipe for success. If you're, a smaller organization, is one I can attest to on many times. If you can focus and go in, you will be successful and have a lot more runway to go get the other things than trying to do them all at the same time.
Yeah, and they kind of build upon each other, right? Like you said, like for us, the big part is like getting customers into the system or sending review requests. And then once you have them, now what's that next building block on top of that we could do? Okay, we could talk about the marketing components, we could talk about responses. And then, maybe later on there's additional things that you want to do, but the majority of people that come, at least to us, have, like, let's say 2 or 3 main things, right? It's not everything. So let's address the first one and then move on to the next one. So I love the solve the problems in pieces, and we'll talk more about solutions as we go here. I think you guys touched on this a little bit, but celebrating those successes, like even achieving, hey, you're green lit, like you're ready to go, good job. Showing that value to the bottom line. Hey, you have X amount more reviews, you have a 5-star rating, establishing like some baselines on goals. And I think this is, everything that we do, we should probably have goals against, and we can talk about that a little bit later as well. But one of the features that we are starting to develop and is in beta right now is around milestone emails, and that's really just around celebrating. Hey, you have 10 new reviews, great job, because we know that there's a delight factor, right? Like there needs to be a top of mind. You're doing a good job. You just need to do more of that, and like let's continue to build on that. Or your rating moved from 4 to 4.5 or whatever that is. So it just I think, showing that value, whether it's a key metric that you're tracking, or even if it's as simple as a success email that you did a great job, like those things matter in those early days post onboarding.
Yeah, there's a real power, I'm sure everybody, the real power of gamification here, because you
Hmm.
are trying to change behavior. You're not going into small businesses that have the 5-star review and they're sending out thousands of review requests and doing everything perfect, right? Especially in this, congratulate, hey, you sent out 100 review requests for a business that has only like maybe 3 reviews online. Like we know that that's going to convert into more than 3 reviews. So they're going to be doing a lot of things that probably are not necessarily the easiest for them to do. But it's, oh, you're changing that behavior, you're rewarding that. Like, hey, you reached 100. That's a cool number. We all like 100. Now, how do we make, how do we get 100 total reviews, right? And so you kind of keep stepping on that idea and setting those goals that you can, quickly achieve by just doing one simple thing, right? And that's the idea again, it's just like keeping things simple. Let's put those review, and if we're consistently doing that behavior, then we can reach those goals, right? Like I'm not going to be able to walk in the gym right now and like bench press 350 pounds. And that's going to take a long, long time. Yes, the salesman at the desk is going to tell me I can achieve that and I'm going to feel
Yeah.
great about it. But it's going to take some time. It's going to be going and doing a couple and doing it over time. Then we get to that rate, right? So it's very similar to services
And you
or
might need a
software.
spotter.
I might need a spot. I'm definitely going to need Brian. So come help me out here. So all of these things, a lot of times, there's times, especially if you're shooting for that high goal, you want to be this biggest business. It's easy to feel intimidated about some of the work in between, or I'm not getting there fast enough. But if you continually put those milestone goals, if you do some of those achievements that show the good behavior, it is a great way to keep that business moving forward and solving that next milestone.
Absolutely. Um, One of the things that Matt, you and I have talked about is kind of and I think we've hit on a few of these points, but um, the full customer journey. So, there's lots of things to cover, right? And so how do you how do you handle that and how do you prioritize that on I have some thoughts, but I want to hear from you guys, of course, but like how do you look beyond that initial value and map that out with a customer or client or clinic?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say, go ahead, Brian.
Please go for it. You go.
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest mistakes I see when trying to do this is to map a customer journey to what you are doing. And so what ends up happening is that I've created this great roadmap of what you're supposed to do. And then we all know clients and customers don't follow any of that. And so you have to you have to re-break it all down. And the customer journey map should really be how does a customer see value, right? And what value that they're looking for. And sometimes that may mean 2 or 3 different routes. But if you set it up in a way where you're building success, this stage help support the next one, right? SEO, having keywords and reviews and things that help optimize, right? The idea of building up information, you're going to be able to then get to a spot where you can actually make success instead of later down the road where you say, well, this is really step 5. A lot of times our clients or our customers want to be able to get to that step, and you have to be able to show that route. And so thinking of your customer journey not as just like a way through your product. And Brian, you've probably done this, especially with yours. It's like you have so many different things you need to get done. We need to make sure we get all these setup things done before
Hmm.
we start looking all the way over here, which is what everybody wants to see, right? And so I'm interested to hear, like on your side, how you think of a customer journey.
Yeah, I mean, so after the kind of the, I don't want to say more the easy, but the um, quicker things, I guess, in general, we have defined more of our support team that focus on specific areas because you have to get to the hard stuff too. So, for example, like our system integrates with QuickBooks and zero accounting platforms, right? That's a highly detailed setup process that we guide them through. And so once again, like during the initial onboarding process or even the review of the system initially, we're talking about that. But it's like, okay, well, here's the kind of steps we'll take. Then you'll have the meeting with, a QuickBooks Online specialist, specialist in our team who's going to help you with this onboarding process. You do a lot of insurance claim reviews. Okay, we're going to have someone on our team who really focuses on those areas. We're going to set up a specific time. We're going to dive into that. And you'll have a 1 hour review and Q&A and possibly follow up. So what's helped us too is to kind of set the expectations from the clinic customer side of it, that yes, these are very important topics and we are absolutely going to talk about them. And we're going to make sure you're talking to the right person. We're going to set, both parties are going to set aside time, right? This is not something that anybody wants to leave to, when all of a sudden things aren't going well and we have to figure it out, or someone has 10 minutes here. It's like, nope, this is part of the process. So we try to structure that as, here's the onboarding, here's the go live, here's kind of the post go live Q&A as part of that. If needed, you're going to meet with specialists on our team. So just to, once again, you talked about this before, but setting expectations and then just making sure, because we did have issues in the past where someone would, a lot of times we'd suggest a lot of things. We'd have a list of things that they could choose from. And let us know if you're interested in these things. And we'd wait for them to say, yes, I want this. Cool. We'd set it up. But the problem is we'd get 8 months down the road and they'd say, you never told me you had a QuickBooks integration. Say, well, was on the list and we've had it listed in other places, but it was a little bit more, we just needed to change our mindset a little bit, and not forceful at all, but just like, do you use QuickBooks? Yes. Do you want to integrate? Yes. Okay, let's set up the call. Right. Instead of waiting for them to make that next move. And we definitely found that helped with overall satisfaction in the transition process, because some of those things, if they go too long down the road, it just causes issues, right? And it's all tied to the transition. And so we want to be more proactive with it.
Yeah, that's the key word right there. I was thinking is proactive versus reactive. One of the things here, like as we talk about the customer journey, right? We talked, Matt and I were talking about the review generation side of this and just getting those reviews in. But one of the things that we found in our survey, that there's a gap between what SMBs are doing and what an agency or reseller is doing for their business. And that's highlighted here. And that can be things like commenting or replying on social media, sharing reviews via social media, analyzing feedback, insights, things like that. So those are things that not a lot of agencies are doing for their SMBs right now. But as most of us know, those can be kind of tedious things and take some time. So as you think about areas that are, opportunities to bring more value to clients, that is definitely one of them. But I'm sure there's many more you can find. But I think that's one that we found in our research. And so, we've talked a lot about the onboarding process and the acquisition and things like that with customers. But then you get to the setting of the goals, and as you have these check-ins, whether it's a week after onboarding or it's a quarterly check-in with your VIPs or something like that, what are the things we're talking about with them? Are you, setting these kind of very specific goals around rating and volume, response rates? Is it around creating content? Is it around, business goals that this solution is supposed to have? And I think those are all important. But one of the things that Matt, you brought up was aggressive but realistic. And so, would love to get your guys' thoughts on how you approach this with clients. I'm sure it's very specific to each client, but like, what are some things when you're setting goals with them that you find to be extremely helpful for success? Brian, I'll let you go first.
Sure. Yeah. So we don't actively work in setting goals, other than the fact that what we do is we check in and see to make sure like the features are being used. So for example, if we were to see that like they were getting review requests sent out and getting reviews, and then all of a sudden they weren't, that probably means there's something in the setup that they may not realize they turned off or something like that. I mean, it's not like average staff couldn't do it. It'd probably be an admin or person who was messing around with something and didn't realize they were turning things off. But even if they did, then it's like, hey, we noticed there's a change here. Let's make sure that's going, back up to running. Because it, particularly with reviews, once it's going, it is really simple, right? So we don't necessarily have to push them. The only thing is that, if they find that maybe they aren't getting as many, maybe we look at the language that's being sent out in the request, or the timing, or is the staff following the proper steps within the CounselEAR system to then trigger those review requests, or is the staff skipping some steps and that's causing, we had a new staff member start last month, they're not doing this step, our reviews went down, right? Like, so that's more about is just making sure there's just consistency. And then, yeah, that's primarily what we're helping with there.
Yeah, I think for me, it's aligning the customer's expectation to what your tool, platform, or service can offer, right? And so that's the biggest thing is a lot of times we keep going back to the idea. A lot of they're coming to us or you because they have a need and they're not quite sure what to do about it. I want more business. I want more repeat customers. I want to look better online, right? They very vague goals that you ask, and so that's why sometimes it's very difficult to even ask. It's what is the outcome you're looking for? It's I want more reviews. Okay. Well, then let's talk about the things. In order to get more reviews, we need to be sending out this many per month. Let's look at how many people you have coming in. Are we capturing all of those as they check out, as they visit, as they leave the building, as they, whatever it may be, is that kind of end point. Let's capture that. Are we at least sending those responses and it's one thing to say go get 100, request 100 new reviews, but if you only have 30 clients a week, you're not getting 100 reviews, or you're not going to getting 100 requests. So the idea is, are you maximizing on the volume that you have? And let's start talking about like what that means in the system, right? Let's go translate the goal that you have, a very broad goal, into some very realistic actions or jobs to be done. Again, it's all about building some of that customer behavior. Start building some of the behaviors that we know, give results. And some of that will take time. And if you align it with some key actions, go do this, go do that, get Y benefit, then you start building up the things that you need to then go to the next one. So as you start thinking about retention, as we talked about before, we solved that. All right, now what's the next thing? It's like, all right, well, I need more repeat business. All right, how are we engaging with the customers we've already had in order to bring them back into our doors, right? And so some of that is that next step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one thing I'll add is on the last bullet here about the laddering up to business goals. So like if your goal is, hey, I want to get 100 new reviews over a certain amount of time, why? Like what impact is that going to have on your business? Do you have goals set against like feedback ratings or like an NPS score? Or do you have things that hey, we want to test out a new product or service and we need to get feedback quickly to know if this is effective. And so like there's larger business goals that these should ladder up to when you're thinking about partnering with a client or a customer and what these goals look like. Um, I think this is the last point here on onboarding, but just I mentioned this earlier. The make or break part of this is just, and I think you guys have done a great job of outlining, starting small, create a plan or a roadmap, highlight those successes, and communicate this often and early with the person you're onboarding because, as I said earlier, this can be your make or break moment in that process of retaining a customer and keeping them happy for a long time. I know, Matt, on our side, a lot of our positive reviews are about onboarding and how helpful it is and how important it is. And it just sets them up for such a great experience if they feel comfortable from the onset. And so I just can't emphasize that enough here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, we got about 15 minutes. So let's move on to the long-term the strategies for retention. And I think a lot of this might sound repetitive, but I think it's in different stages, and I think it's important that it's unique in that way, because a big part of retention is discovering those new problems and finding solutions for them. So, as we kind of talked about, the onboarding was like, hey, let's get to first value. What's that first thing we need to do? And then we're going to have a follow-up call in a certain amount of time, and you're probably going to uncover a new problem that you need to find a solution for. And so from both of your perspectives, Brian, I'll ask you first, but the check-in calls, the regular contact, or at least some flow of they have a lifeline to you so that and you're kept informed of a problem if one exists. How do you set that up, and how important is that to CounselEAR?
Yeah, I mean, so we do regular check-in calls. We found those vary in benefit. In some cases, you get the front office staff member who takes the call and it was like, "Oh, I do know of something we need to talk with you about." Great. And other times, you're amongst many other calls are taking, "Ah, things are good. and they're a group of 5 clinical locations and 20 staff members, and maybe that's not necessarily true. So we found we needed to combine it with other things. Like we were working really hard on the follow-up calls and we thought, great, but we realized that things would bubble to the surface that maybe were outstanding issues. And so we implemented a Feature Friday series a few years ago. I think maybe up to close to like 200 videos at this point. And so we every Friday we find some key feature within the system or workflow. Sometimes it's really niche. Sometimes it's, maybe overly obvious, but maybe some people haven't tested it. And we have a little description. It's a short, 3 to 8 minute video of my voice yammering on about how to do something very specific in the system. And it helps us get to people in a practice who aren't necessarily taking that call at the check-in, but have things they want to function more effectively. And it's really helped us build out a really solid library as well. So even while someone's looking at the system, they go to our editorial library, they keyword search on something very specific that's important to them. And ideally there's a video that's going to cover that really quickly. And so it was designed more towards the, retention, keeping people happy, helping elicit new ideas from clinics as well. Because sometimes they'll watch those and say, that's great, but I also need this. Right. But we found it also has been really good for the initial kind of, review process that clinics go through and the onboarding, right? Because it's if you do, we do a lot of like hour to 1.5 hour training calls. Even with that, you just can't get in everything and you don't want to. It's just too much information. It would just fall by. But these little segments have been very well received.
Yeah, I think the important thing to think about, especially as you start looking downstream, is the importance again on data and monitoring the behavior. A lot of times the problems that you did solve can change. And so you need to find what is the new thing that you need to be doing. And a lot of times data can show that before a customer will reach out. A lot of times I've found when you hear from the customer, they've already tried to solve it 3 or 4 times and might even be frustrated at this point. And if you looked and saw, like in our case, if we see the number of review requests trend outside of the normal, that can be an indicator that something might not be quite right. Are you getting the value that you want to see? And yes, we solved that 6 months ago and we're doing great, but now we need to revisit it. Let's go talk about that. The other part about this is, especially as you start talking towards the long term of your customers, is there's turnover, there's change. Finding those new people, finding those new goals. A lot of times somebody that comes in is looking to bring their expertise and they're looking to address a different problem from a different perspective. And so having check-in calls, having reach outs based on data, all of that help you identify what is that next thing that you need to be working on. And then how do I go solve that? And then once you do it, again, rinse and repeat. It's, all right, we've got this, we've built up a really good set here. If we see it's when any one of those 2 things now going down, let's revisit again. Maybe we need a refresher. Maybe we need to have a retraining. Maybe it's just a quick check call. All of those things help support retention in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'm hearing from you two, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we also need to listen to feedback and collect it in multiple ways, and not just written or verbal feedback, but data feedback on usage and adoption and things like that. So, very
And I will say,
important.
I apologize. One really quick thing is, a
Yeah.
few years ago, we also implemented a private Facebook group. We get a lot of really good feedback there. People feel very comfortable being very honest on feedback on Facebook, and it's good because we need to see it. And we also will see some of our clinics will step up. In some cases, someone will say it's not working this way. It should. This is driving me crazy. And we'll have 4, 5, 6 clinic owners that will pop in and say, I've been using this for years. This is how I use it differently than what you're suggesting. And we won't necessarily even have to jump in. And other times we'll say, that's a great idea. We should look at that. Because we're, in-house development, sometimes we get things out quickly and we post back to that thread in Facebook and say, here's the new feature, that addresses this concern. So that actually turned out to be, there's some management with it, but that turned out to be a really interesting way of gathering feedback as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you met Brian, you mentioned these things like the staying engaged is, engagement with your customers, your clients is so important. Right? So like you mentioned that the Friday series, it might be a podcast, it might be social media, the Facebook group that you mentioned, e-newsletters, simple things, webinars is kind of our chosen method of this. But at some level, you have to stay engaged with your clients and customers because I've found and product marketing that sometimes I'll reach out about something. Hey, we're having a webinar, and people will respond, hey, I have a question about, something with the product. And so like just having channels, however those channels are, like you're gonna find people will use them in ways you don't expect, but it's that ease at that moment. That's the easy place for them to respond. And so you just have to be willing and open to collecting and listening wherever possible. So the other component to this is the metrics that show value. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but the one I really think is important here is beyond all the core functionality that we offer or whatever your product or solution offers. Um, is being able to track things by specific area or product or service. For instance, in our system, it's the tagging and being able to organize feedback by a topic or theme. That just helps you like dive into a specific issue or area of focus rather than trying to look at everything that you're getting and all the feedback and just pick it out and figure out what's going on. So if possible, highly recommend looking at things in more granular ways, at least when you're talking about value. So the end user, the end customer, right? They can see that this is very specific. You're providing a little bit more insight, and as we've shown earlier, providing insights is one of the things that can be value to a small business that they're not doing. Okay, we got 9 minutes left. Perfect. There is some time for questions if people want to drop some of those in there in the Q&A or the chat, either one. But just to recap, couple clear processes in place. Reminder that onboarding is never done. I think that was a big takeaway for me, is just this iterative process of constantly going back, training, communicating, listening, working with the product team if you have that and you're developing new things, maintaining that communication cycle so that however somebody wants to leave you feedback, you're listening to that, and then take that as a touch point to solve a problem. It's not forcing, hey, we want you to just do this, this, and this. It's what are we trying to solve, and how can our solution get you there, whether it's more website visitors, whether it's a smoother process, more reviews, whatever that is. So I do want to thank Brian and Matt. Great job. Really appreciate your insights. Brian Urban from CounselEAR and Matt Saeger from GatherUp. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. I know there was a question about Zapier that Matt answered, and yes, we will send out the recording and the slides following the webinar. But any agencies want to, we do have this handy review management guide for agencies. You can use that QR code on the screen, or when we send out the slides, you can go to the link. So any final thoughts, Matt, Brian, on growing your business, onboarding, iterative processes, and listening to these customers and making a better experience?
Yeah, it's hard. So I think to some
Thanks for
degree,
saving that till the end.
yeah, I say that from a point of, I guess I've been in the private practice myself. I'm now in a business that supports private practices. And I just feel like, particularly you're wearing a lot of hats, typically starting these businesses, running these businesses. And so give yourself a little bit of grace on some of these areas. Like you might be phenomenal at marketing. A lot of the stuff you're saying, like, yes, I have processes for these, but I struggle in other areas. Like, like I said, the clinics we tend to support, it's the other side. It's kind of the inversion of that. Just give yourself some grace. And so that's one of the things that we try to communicate to our clinics as well, is like, yeah, it's okay that you're not an expert in marketing. It's okay that you're not an expert in coding and reimbursement, insurance claims, and those kinds of things. Those are the tools that we're helping to build in to make that easier for you. So you still don't have to be an expert. You just need to have a good sense of like, the value you're seeing and why you're, like you mentioned before, Steve, like why do you have the goals that you have, right? To say you want 100 reviews is great, but let's understand those goals a little bit more. So yeah, it sounds really silly, but just even being honest with yourself that like, it's okay. You got 12 fires burning. They're all burning really high. You can make a million lists. There's just, anytime you can automate something, you definitely want to explore that option.
Yeah, and I think I'll just double click on the idea that, starting simple, and it's probably even more simple than you think. It's one helpful practice is just to time box it, right? I want to be able to onboard somebody in 1 or 2 hours. Yeah, that really puts down the amount of content that you can do in that amount of time. Brian, you touched on that. That was a great point. It's all right. If I can see this value after 1 hour, it becomes very tangible, and then we keep working from there to do the next things. But that a real thing a lot of times is just to make it more simple than you think. Just because you're an expert in these areas, going to people that don't have the same level of knowledge, and so try to challenge yourself. It even becomes a great kind of own marketing tool for your own services. Right? We can get you set up and start using in an hour. Right? You can see value in an hour or 30 minutes or 15. I mean, there is power in the idea of like getting started quickly, especially seeing kind of post-pandemic as everybody resets on a lot of the software and services they were using. A lot of times it is starting back at the basics. They need to be able to move quickly and see some value quickly for the money that they're putting in. And so, 15 minutes to try to get more reviews, that sounds great. Or 15 minutes to now see my reviews on my website. That's awesome. Those are things that you can quick win. And don't there is a ton of value in the simple.
Um, we did receive a question. So I want to ask maybe Matt, but Brian, if you have thoughts too, feel free. Our client has received several first-party feedback, but with no comments. So I'm assuming that's ratings only. And the clients are not moving to leave a review on a third party. Any suggestions?
Yeah, so some of the things that we've seen, especially on the first party, there's a couple things to think through. The value of first party is you also get to see if it's positive or negative, and a lot of the data we're looking at right now is first party tends to be a little bit more on the negative side. That's okay, we'll still learn, but it's not going to those third party. The other thing to think about, though, in one of the conversations I had with an agency was the amount is also don't yeah, well, let me put it a different way. Use the reminders. A lot of times, even for myself, it's like, hey, let's leave a review. Okay, I'm really busy right now. I'll get it back to it in 30 minutes. And then 30 minutes go by and and then that reminder email, that reminder Slack, hey, you should be looking at this. Especially for those that gave you that positive or negative, use the reminders as a way to go, post that on your third party. One of the customers that we were talking to said like 80% of their reviews came after the reminder. And so use those second and third because we're all human. Things happen. If you're not seeing it right away, try to play with the different amounts of time for your reminders. Each industry is a little bit different as well. So some you may want to wait a couple of days, and then some you may want to have today and then tomorrow. So play around with the dates that you have as well for those reminders, because that might also help you see some more third-party reviews.
Excellent. All right, I don't see any more questions, but thank you for that, Anonymous, who dropped that in there. Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Brian, Matt, great job. We'll follow up with the recording and slides soon, but I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining.
Everyone.
Thank you.